Very, very pleased to introduce our afternoon keynote speaker, Stephen McHale. He is the co-founder and chief chairman and CEO of Explorys, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about that in his comments. He's had a 25-year career in founding, investing, and building technology companies. He's recognized for his focus in data mining and business intelligence. He's been chairman and CEO of Everstream, and in 1985, he founded McHale and Associates Incorporated, a U.S. Connect regional office where he served as chairman and CEO. We're very pleased to have him here. For so long in my career, we've talked about technology in healthcare, and usually we're thinking of all the ways it increases costs. And I think we're right on the cusp of learning about how technology is going to decrease cost and truly improve quality of healthcare. So I'm delighted to introduce him, and let's give him our full attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. It's really an honor. I got to listen into a little bit earlier, and the topics that you're covering are very important. And I think the opportunity to really transform healthcare, as we set out on our mission some time ago, was we created a purpose. The reason we did is we found that we were hiring a lot of technology people right out of college, and they were so young they didn't really even understand what healthcare meant. And their parents hadn't moved into an age bracket where they had significant health care issues. They hadn't, obviously, as they're coming right out of college. And so, we wanted to ensure that they understood that there's a purpose and a mission towards our organization. And the purpose and mission is to unlock the power of big data to improve health care for everyone. And it's pretty lofty. It's what we call a BHAG, because it has a lot of accountability associated with that. And we started the company 4 years ago in partnership with the Cleveland Clinic. The business strategy at the time was not clear. We're entrepreneurial as a team. From a background perspective, did not come from healthcare, came from banking and telecommunications. And so we're investors as well, so we approached Cleveland Clinic to launch a big data company in healthcare, and essentially start to democratize data appropriately in the mission to transform and improve the healthcare market as a whole. That was over 4 years ago. It was actually 4.5 years ago. And so obviously we were very naive to how healthcare worked. We were really direct as it relates to our lack of understanding of healthcare, but it was also considered an asset because we didn't really have the thinking that existed within healthcare, so we could bring in some fresh thinking. So that's a little bit about our history. One of the interesting things when we started out, we were very kind of forward thinking as it relates to that expression that we say, try to skate where the puck is going. So we had worked with large technologies like Oracle and Teradata and IBM and Microsoft in our past in banking and telecom, and we really wanted to work with disruptive technology, so we spent some time with some of the founding architects of Google and Facebook and Yahoo in California, shared our vision of really democratizing and unlocking big data in healthcare. So we took a very radical and disruptive approach towards how to manage that data and leverage it, and that's has served us well. I would tell you it's a little bit of luck, to be honest with you. We didn't have it all mapped out. We've been very fortunate. We've been surrounded by wonderful people to teach us about healthcare and how it works today and the vision for what it will look like tomorrow. So we have been tremendously fortunate. So again, I want to thank everyone for here for showing up and listening to my thoughts and around this. So as a model, we've evolved to we found ourselves with a pretty significant network, a national network building, over 300 hospitals, 200,000 providers, a lot of data, a tremendous amount of data, more than than many would have imagined we could have amassed. Over 35 million patients projected by the end of this year. We think it'll be 45 million patients. The thinking there is as you aggregate the data from healthcare systems, standardize, harmonize it, curate data, it gives you the statistical force to really understand what works and what doesn't. And so as you start to change models to, again, determine what will improve quality of life, and ultimately bring costs down, you need a lot of data. So Cleveland Clinic broke ranks first and said, okay, you can have our data, go see who else you can get to join in. And the network's $52 billion in net patient care and growing very, very rapidly, which is exciting, but it's also a bit of a challenge. So we've doubled our team in a year and on track to potentially double again. So it's a lot of work. So when we look at the dynamics, we kind of jokingly say in the end, it's we call it healthcare Hunger Games. It's we want to get down to the dynamics that have really hit this market. We operate under a thesis that when the dust settles, there'll be 50 to 100 mega systems left standing. So we had front row seats at banking and telecom and watched those industries consolidate significantly, and I'll show you some stats on that. It's our perspective, it's healthcare's turn. So there's going to be moving from thousands and thousands of independent organizations to these mega systems that will form, and we see that happening today. So it really gets down to who's going to really deliver the best care, I think, in the end. Who's going to build models that improve care and drive costs down, which is where our mission exists. So we've tried to stay very closely aligned to what we believe are the market dynamics that are enforced today. So dealing with these core elements is critical. It's a perfect storm environment. It's as we started thinking about healthcare, we were like, there's a lot of forces coming in. Decreasing reimbursement is one that I think everybody is feeling between Medicare and Medicaid. And then commercial following quickly on behind it. Want and understand quality at a much more transparent level is paramount in the industry. Trying to really contain these operating costs. And then we talked about consolidation. And then, people are just, even consumers want value. I don't know if you've seen some other pretty interesting companies out there. There's a company called Castlight. They're in California, and they get involved in trying to understand what systems are charging for specific procedures or care, and provide information to large employers as it relates to where they might seek care. They're still working on the outcomes and quality side of things and improving, but ultimately as the consumer takes on more personal accountability for their care, which is not just the financial high deductible plans or paying out of pocket, but also personally how they behave. And we think that more and more of these disruptive models will emerge. As we think about our model, we see a national value-based care network forming, and that can take on risk and really get much more efficiencies out of the dollars that are spent in delivering care and managing the patients that need it. So as we look at some of the stats, we talked a little, I early on alluded to the consolidation. You can see it dipped for a little while, and then as ACA and some of those things started getting traction, you can see that it's the consolidations and the M&As are moving up again. And they're a little different this time. Some of them are starting at a mega level. So recent ones, Tenet acquiring Vanguard, Trinity acquiring Catholic Health East. I mean, there's a list of them that continue to go on. There's CHS is attempting to buy HMA, and I think we're going to just see more and more and more of that assimilation consolidation. So with that, as you look deeper into things, where does that get us? If you look at hospital systems versus even semiconductors or airlines or retail pharmacies we talked about earlier, the aggregation of the market sits in the bulk in the top 5, and then in the top 15, the far majority. And so these trends would tell you as they really assimilated and consolidated that it's likely a path similar will occur within healthcare. It's hard to say, based on the dynamics, at what rate that'll happen, but there's significant evidence that says it's going to happen. And when you think about the transformation of quality, the ability to really manage a patient completely drives that, right? From all the way to the home is really a meaningful reason to see that kind of consolidation versus just the economic forces that are trying to drive it. It's a really important distinction, I think, to recognize that consolidation can bring great impact to the quality of life. It's not just about, people getting wealthier or the economic drivers for the shareholders or stakeholders. This kind of consolidation can really improve quality of life and overall outcomes. So we talked a little bit about introduced the concept of the growing demand for value. I don't think anybody here doesn't understand that. If you're here in the room, it's clear that it's really important to you, and it's really important as it relates to the mission overall for healthcare providers and systems that take care of people. I think what's going to be more interesting is, how do we start to shift our behavior in the delivery of healthcare to being more proactive again, and which can start to show value in a different way and in a proactive fashion. How do we start to understand the people that we serve and in a deeper level, and this way versus just, as I say, waiting for them to break, we can really help. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity. When we look at value-based models, and these are popping up everywhere. It's very interesting. The government drove the initial wave of these, and their experiments. I was talking to a CEO of a big system down in Texas. This was probably a year and a half ago, and I asked him, why are you getting into the Medicare ACO, Pioneer ACO? And he was smiling and had just gotten the data that they'd run analysis on the claims that CMS had sent them related to the populations they were responsible for. And he kind of looked at me and he showed me the sheets and he said, this is tuition. This is what we need to pay in tuition to learn how to start to treat our populations better. So versus really trying to focus on the bottom line, this CEO had a vision of paying a tuition in a non-conventional way to have a learning experience for his team as to how they could stand up their care models, how they could treat the population that they served at that moment differently and drive better outcomes, with the recognition that financially it was likely going to be not a positive outcome for them. And I think we see more and more of that. There's still a little bit of this territorialism around protecting intellectual property and protecting know-how and things like that, but we're starting to see that really dissipate as well, in that I think everybody recognizes if we don't come together and share the knowledge that we have and the learnings that we achieve as it relates to what drives, better value, which value is quality over cost, and so quality is on top, which is important, and then ultimately when you add in the cost factor, you can determine did we achieve something meaningful that drove both of those key elements. So these models, again, I think you're going to see them dissipate. Some are, science projects won't be successful. Many won't be. They won't sustain themselves. But new models will grow on top of them. So it's what we consider almost the fertilizer to grow these new value-based care models. And there's going to be a lot more of them. The private payers are really trying to understand what their role will be as this market transforms. You hear a lot about, well, this looks like Groundhog Day to the 80s, right, with the managed care strategies, and we hear that all the time. But it's very different in this case. I mean, the economic factors are much more ominous in what's at stake, and I think the technology is now in place to bring the transparency to data that would really allow us to change the way we care and behave and take risk. So, as we look at these value-based care models developing, the one thing that's common to them is that the providers are taking more risk. Providers have always taken clinical risk, right? And it's been there forever. But now the financial risk is starting to layer in. And it brings so many complexities to this. Many of the folks we work with are launching plans and or have had plans. They clearly have plans associated or they're self-funded related to their employee base, the bigger systems. And then, they maybe have an MA plan, a Medicare Advantage plan, things like that. So we're seeing a lot of this. And when that comes into it, the big art to that is all the remuneration allocation. Where are the value points within a global payment model, and how should that get allocated? So the one thing that, again, is common about these is that there's risk shifted to provider systems, and now the provider systems have to understand, how do I understand that risk so I don't, jump off a cliff per se? And how do I, once I've taken that risk, how do I allocate the remuneration that comes in associated with the care of the population to what functions are being delivered? So it's pretty complicated. Obviously, you guys, I get this expression wrong, but I think I'm preaching to the choir, is it? Or is it singing to the choir? I think it's preaching, right? So I'm preaching to the choir. But again, I think it's worth continually looking at this, because it is such a major factor as we move forward in these new models. An interesting concept that actually we had put together was called share of chart. It's really not that ingenious or anything, but the concept we really had leveraged from banking, who, when you think about the level of technology and systems and data transparency or data connectivity in banking is very, very significant in quality and accuracy. You think about if we ran our healthcare system that way, we seem to really care a lot about our money. So we've created institutions and systems to make sure that that's all really well managed and accessible. So we see that analog to healthcare as we really take a much greater commitment to our health. But as we look at the model in banking, one of the things they had created was called share of wallet. And the interesting concept about share of wallet that we thought really aligned with healthcare as this model starts to change is, so let's say I'm, and some of our folks came from banking, obviously. I've got your portfolio, you're one of my customers as a bank, and maybe I have your mortgage, I've got your bank accounts, your deposits, a number of other elements, trust, things like that. And then you apply for a boat loan, which I don't recommend. They say the happiest 2 days of your life is the day you buy your boat and the day you sell it. I haven't had my second happy day yet. It's a little boat, though. And the bank looks at you and says, you're on the edge. You're a little high risk for that, and they turn it down. But what they figured out is if they turn that boat loan down, you're likely going to go get a very high-risk boat loan somewhere if you're determined to get the boat, and then they just put their whole portfolio at risk. So the same concept in healthcare is if you don't understand your share of chart and who's delivering care to the populations that you've taken responsibility for, you're at a lot of risk. And that's, I know it's obvious, but to be able to measure that and then determine how do you want to serve the greater share of chart? What's your strategy to execute around that growth, which will control your risk, but more importantly, it'll control the quality of care and the outcomes for your patients. And this way, somebody doesn't take them down the road of a high-risk equivalent of a boat loan when you're on the hook. And so, we think that's an important perspective to consider as we go through. So another area, and we've redacted as much as we can from our stuff, so I apologize for anything that looks salesy. That's not the point. It's just that we learned a lot from our environment, and so that's what we have as it relates to content. And this is a dashboard, and when you think about transformation and change management, which is critical, as we came into healthcare, I'll just share this experience, we thought that, okay, build these really large-scale platforms for processing and analytics and cloud computing and to really serve these systems. What we found is that it really needed a lot of help with change management. How do we understand how to behave differently as you're changing incentives, but also what kinds of models do we stand up, et cetera. And when you start with the executive level of a healthcare system, and the first question, we were at one in Chicago not too long ago, and we haven't really built any scenarios. The leadership is when we think about transformation, they've looked at costs, they've looked at reimbursement reduction, trying to drive costs out of their system around that, but it still was more around a fee-for-service model. And when you think about a transition and having visibility into the impact of the current, you just can't burn all your ships, as they say, the expression is. So how do you give insight into scenario building to leadership? So that was an area that that was really not well served. So the example would be, if you set up a value-based care model, so you set up patient-centered medical homes around that. You change your care models. You work with a population to achieve better outcomes and quality, and essentially you get what you ask for, right? It works. But then in the non-understand elements of that is what to do to your core service lines that were fee-for-service, that really feed the engine. The service lines that you've traditionally run the business on or the organization on get hit. Volume comes down, revenue comes down, cash flow comes down. And you have to watch that carefully as you start, and as we say, the old mechanic analogy is you start cranking on, this is really going back, so I'm going to say a carburetor. I don't think anybody's carbureted anymore, but you start messing with a carburetor, you can flood the engine or you can stall it out. So you have to be very thoughtful as you tune these models and make those transitions. And, as we say more informally is when you're doing that, you also, part of share a chart is understand whose hide it's coming out of. So if you literally hit a service line, it might be not your system that takes that hit. It may be another system that would have delivered that care. And now that care is avoided, it can be money to the bottom line. I don't want you to get the wrong impression that it's all about the economics, but a lot of it is, because the reality is, as they always say, no money, no mission, but also the key is when you transform and drive quality up, it's going to drive cost out, and it will also drive consolidation. We need a lot of caregivers. I don't think there's an issue of over surplus there, but there's clearly efficiencies, tremendous efficiencies we can see. So this is just an example of how do you bring visibility at the most senior levels of an organization so that you can understand what's happening as you embark on more sophisticated models that you might not be able to get to the detail level with the executives on, but they can see a roll-up. We look at a connected world. We've got a tremendous amount of activity going on, and there's a lot of stakeholders in what revolves around that health system. This is our attempt to try to really understand the stakeholders and how in the interplay with them. We basically think in this, the universe, solar systems, galaxies, things like that, as we modeled our approach into the market, because we think it's really all about networks in the end. Forming the right networks that can communicate and effectively treat consumers better in the healthcare process. And so when you think about integrated delivery networks, think about even the elements associated today with what's happening with the TPAs. Some folks here might have their own TPA, their own plan. They may not. They may outsource it to a big payer or plan. Well, how do I keep that closely integrated in with whatever lives I'm dealing with? Now, what does that mean as it relates to employers? Am I able to go directly to employers and offer them a better quality product? Can I build a narrow network? I would imagine some of these terms are familiar as we're looking at the kinds of models that are evolving very quickly. Risk models, can I take risk? What are the elements to that? There's some neat risk players out there. Actually, this slide, I went the wrong way. Apologies. Which I didn't have. There's actually a pop-up over here that talks about some of the risk models that we must have redacted from this slide because they had vendors on it. But there's a lot of risk models out there for even first that are actuarial driven to understand financial risk. They can also do some predicting. And so, of course, those are things we focus on as well, because it's not so much as focusing on the sickest people, which is, of course, very important, but it's those that have the propensity and the potential to drift into that category, which is the greatest opportunity from our perspective. How do we get them, their trajectory changed? And so there's a lot of really neat science and technology out there that can help bring visibility to that. But if you even think about what CMS has driven from an MU1, MU2 perspective, and even the quality metrics that they're driving people towards, and then hooking reimbursement to that, that's a great start. I mean, just dealing with those gaps in care are just it's so meaningful. The outcomes from that behavior change alone are significant. So again, the one thing that's, I think, nice about this transition is that although it feels really high-paced and high pressure, frankly, the reality is it's the forces are in place to let it take some natural process and baby steps towards accomplishing the goals, and that's one of them. Let's talk about quality, let's drive towards quality, and then what's the next steps? And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. So, we talked about aligning provider incentives a little bit, and how do you really measure value? And so that I'm going to tell you, we don't have a clear answer on that. We have some perspective, but it is extremely challenging. As you can see, some of the folks, Dr. Resnick, out of Vanderbilt, and he thinks about really from his vantage point from urology, but what happens? Where does that reimbursement go? How do we distribute it? How do I know what my value is? So there's a tremendous amount of work going on right now. First, with trying to measure true cost, right? Try to take out that variable as it relates to compensation, although just set it aside temporarily, resource people compensation, and try to understand cost. And then you can add it back in and determine what that drives as a variable depending on that, on the clinicians and or the support staff's compensation models. So that's a heavy focus right now, is to really pull through cost, understand activity-based costing, understand episodic costing, and then if you're ready to make the leap to bundled and procedure costing. So we've done a lot of work in that area. There's a lot more work to be done. But with that costing data and information, you can start to understand how to build value from that, which is which would be a proxy towards understanding value. Of course, outcomes, there'll be an element here that will look at outcomes and say, okay, who in this process or in this care process really drove the majority of the value, and the outcome is going to be wrangled with for years. But it's an exciting opportunity, I think, as we continue to move forward. So, talk about big data. As we started our company 4.5 years ago, we were just hearing that big data concept, and we grabbed a hold of it. There's a open source consortium called Hadoop. I don't know if anybody, raise their hands, if anybody heard the word Hadoop. Good. I was really thinking I might get a blank on that, but 3 or 4 have heard of Hadoop. So as I said, we went out to California and spent some time with some of these architects, and they had just launched an open source initiative called Hadoop. And Hadoop is actually, it's a little elephant kid's toy. We're not sure why they named it that, but it was one of the architects had a kid's toy. It looks like a elephant, and it was called a Hadoop. So they said, let's call it Hadoop. And as we were hanging out there, we started thinking about what data is coming, And one of the moments for me coming out of those different industries when I thought about healthcare was I had a recurring procedure, and I went in and I was talking to my physician, and he was showing me the machine, and I said, wow, look at all that data. And this was probably 5.5 years ago. I said, so where's it going? And he prints out this, looked like something off of a cash register, tore it off, showed it to me, stuck it in a folder. And I was like, wow, I couldn't imagine that coming from banking and telecom. And so there's big data in there for sure at that device level, but that's even dwarfed by the data we can start to pick up, biometric data, all the different data that we can get access to from home once people are discharged and in these other environments. So there's so much data coming in. And as you think about what it is, big data is, in our definition, and I think this definition's taken hold pretty regularly, is volume, velocity, and variety. So when we thought about this mission again, we're like, well, it's going to be unpredictable, high variety data, because there's not a lot of standards right now that are driving the structure around that data, which is like the internet, right? High velocity, it's going to be picking up speed, coming in, streaming real time. So there's a lot of data, 150 exabytes, growing very, very quickly in healthcare. And then, 1,000 per second in vital signs captured in, that was a discrete environment. I don't have that stat, but it's, that's how fast things can start coming in. So that's a lot of velocity. And then when you look at, even in coding, we have an expression around the shop that says, if you've seen one EMR, you've only seen one EMR. And that's it. And so even in, of our systems, 60% like the market is Epic. But again, the implementations of those are very different. You find data squirreled away in the strangest places. We had one healthcare system, not to mention, had 65 different variations of hemoglobin A1C tests that had to be normalized, standardized, and curated into one. Actually got it to 2, but there's so much variety even in the structured fields that people are inputting into the kind of data you see come out of it. So there's more work to be done on that. What's interesting, in the right environment, once you get a look at that data, you can then start a closed feedback loop to change the behavior of how that data is input into systems and where to improve its value. So that's a process that I think is going on right now. At least we're in situations where we see that ongoing, and it makes a big difference. It's a change. It's another one of the change management processes that we need to embrace. And there's all the way to the right. We'd say there's those that push for data input, which will improve value for research, which could have a lot more granularity to it. That's really pushing the envelope because we have physicians and providers and clinicians that are already strained with the workflow impact of taking on an EMR. And so trying to take it to the next level can be challenging. But I think it's improving every day. It's really encouraging. So a lot of data out there. When you apply big data, a little bit of the statistics out there, there's pontification, although these are very reliable sources, I'd say, but it's still, analysis and projections, but there's clearly a lot of opportunity here from an economic perspective in targeting disease prevention, DABLE-enabled adherence programs. I find that a really fascinating area. What's really interesting is, more recently, pharmaceutical life science companies very much want to get involved in this value-based care market. They're kind of on the periphery, and they're not really sure what to do. In the past, they try to go buy big chunks of data and scan it for whether it's pharmacovigilance or safety signals or health economics and outcomes research, but really to try to understand, I think, more how to develop therapies that were more specialized versus, because the blockbuster drugs era are kind of really coming to an end. And I think as a whole, our society and people are recognizing that, maybe these mega medications are not driving the value that we'd hoped they would. And so they've got to get more refined around populations. Of course, omics, genomics can really drive that refinement and, as we'd say, for personalized medicine. But the interesting dynamic that you talk to the leadership of pharma, and they were like, well, how do I get to the seat at the table? One example was, okay, if you have access to 2.5 million pre-diabetics or diabetics, or you're tracking them, we'll take some risk. We think our therapy is far better than, this insulin delivery. If you change the delivery system for adherence, it could make a big difference in a diabetic population. If you believe you have a better medication than metformin or glucophage or something like that as a core element, then why shouldn't you get paid for that value? If you can really drive and control A1Cs into a controlled state better than some other therapy, instead of getting paid for an SKU, why don't I get paid upside? So let's say we'll name that tune in 6 notes, and if we miss, it's on us. If we hit it, we get depending on the size of the population, $40-50 million upside, which health systems should be happy to do as long as you achieve that goal, because it's probably 3 or 4 times that in savings, right? Maybe more. So that's an interesting dynamic when I think about adherence. And so one of the things they want to get involved in is driving adherence, driving that. Saw a lot of gadgets at this at the Cleveland Clinic Innovation Summit a couple weeks ago about these automated pill bottles and for reminding at-home medication adherence, and it's pretty neat. But I think it's got a long way to go. But if you think about proven pathways, I mean, there's a lot out there as it relates to how we've tried to standardize care and establish pathways, but there's so much more coming. Evidence-based medicine, and the key is, we don't want to wait a year or 2 years to get that value into and that knowledge into the systems. We want to get it in there in months. Once we've really got enough statistical information and we're running 45 million lives, 50, 60, 70, we have enough now to start to understand quickly what's happening in the care delivery and what really matters. So we think that's extremely valuable to include the care models. Obviously, the outcome of that, how do we shift the volume, off the ER, the ED, especially with this new population coming in, which is really important. How do we deal with that population much more effectively? It could really have a big impact on our current healthcare infrastructure. And then, again, we talked about payment innovation and alignment, provider performance, transparency. Those things together could really help us understand where the dollars should flow. And, of course, the R&D, improving trial operations, that's an interesting area. That's clearly interests pharma. When we think about our trial enrollment rates here in the U.S. compared to Europe is abysmal. And it's not that trials are just watching my time, I can really ramble on here. There's a great opportunity here, I think, that really is a winner for everybody and every stakeholder. I'll leave some time for some questions. What's really interesting when we think about the next level, I mean, when you think about getting a return on investment out of your EMR, right? The EMR is a great platform, very important. It's really step one. We've got to get our data in electronic format, standardized format, so we can start to change our behavior, learn from what's going on with the populations we serve, and then put that to use. But what's interesting when we think about the investments in business intelligence, it's even more heightened over the EMR, and it's not even driven by MU, right? So this is pretty darn powerful, the thought that there's a lot of systems that recognize the need to leverage business intelligence and analytics to take advantage of the data that they're so dutifully coding into these EMR systems. The EMR systems, they have aspirations from a population health perspective, and they've got a role, there's no question. It's just, really getting that demarcation point well understood. It was, the analog to that, and when we look at banking, telecom, manufacturing, retail, big ERP systems showed up late 80s and the 90s, if you're familiar with SAP or the big Oracle ERP systems or PeopleSoft, and really were convinced they were just going to do it all, and really stuck to that. And I think squandered a lot of resources and potential trying to, do everything. And in the end, still, Hyperion showed up and 5 other big analytics and BI organizations that spanned across them, because they're just, no matter how hard they try, they're not going to be the only platform in the market. They're not going to be the old ERP. I think we have the same dynamic here, that other solutions have to unify data a layer above the EMRs, bring in multi-stakeholder data from the payers, and from, if there's a clinically integrated network built, bring it in from affiliate providers. I'm getting my cue. I'm getting the hook. And then, how do you unify that data as a trusted broker, manage Stark and a kickback, and a trust? How do you manage all that new governance out there that's still a little murky? There's so much to be done there, and there's so much opportunity around transformation. So again, capturing the continuum of care is critical. As we get all that data together, we're going to really be able to transform and change the way we behave. So we've got a few other slides we can roll through that just talks about the whole picture of data, provider billing data. That's useful, 837, 835 adjudicated data, payer claims data, health operations data, because now you're trying to get to cost, even though many of the EPSI systems, things like that, are allocated costs. They're still, it's a step one. We've talked about home telemedicine. Then there's some real world use cases. How do you drive that? You start out with step one, which is descriptive analytics. What's going on? And then you move towards predictive and prescriptive analytics. So how do we start to change our behavior once we understand what's going on? We can analyze, forecast, predict, and model, and then we optimize. And so this is the evolution that's going on. And it's varying degrees depending on the environment. You get right down to the bottom line as we go right back to the healthcare Hunger Games. It is maximize quality, maximize your margin, and maximize market share. Here's some examples. It's all we have to show, but we'd see, and there's a lot more detail underneath this, but quality improvement. We'd see readmits down by 35%, admissions down 30 to 40%, things like that. 51% in hospital admissions, 35 readmissions, 30 reduction in emergency department visits. So these are real life situations where you unify data, you bring it all together, get it to the point of care, to the individuals, clinicians, and care teams that are responsible for the patients. So really tremendous. I think, we've seen great improvements over this time, and, we're going to see so much more. You can see these. I don't have to read it for you. I don't think I have time. Hopefully you can read. And then when you look at the bundlers, direct to employer, that's a part of a business model issue. But we actually built a very sophisticated bundle that took what would be claims-based CMS data, added clinical, made it very high def. We're able to nail the categories in 3 tiers as it relates to where someone would, where a particular patient based on comorbidities, things like that, would show up in a cost. And then, maximize market share. We started with Centura in Denver. They wanted to align to 400 providers when they rolled out the vision and the strategy around a solution that really unified data. They ended up with 2,000 and growing very rapidly. Again, that's a key to that. So I don't for Q&A, but I got a quick video. I don't know how long. Let me see if I had to switch between systems. We'll see if it works. And if it works, that'll be great.
Real-time data technology has opened a new frontier in the care and cost of treating patients by better managing their treatments and helping avoid costly hospital stays. Bertha Coombs has the latest in our series on the future of healthcare with a look at how real-time data could be a real-world game changer.
Hannah, get up. I've got 2 kids. They're always scared every time I go to the hospital.
Rachel Malott has been in and out of hospitals for years.
I kept asking them, can you find out what's wrong with me?
Suffering from osteoarthritis, high blood sugar, and liver disease, no one seemed to be able to help her get a handle on it all.
I thought, there's no doctors that care about patients anymore.
6 months ago, that changed.
Hey, Rachel.
At Cincinnati's Mercy Health.
And I know I'm not just another number in their office. They actually do care about me.
They do. Mercy Health is a designated accountable care organization, or ACO. Under the Obama Health Reform Act, Medicare now pays ACOs higher rates for improving patients' health and avoiding costly hospital stays.
To be able to reach out and care for patients in a timely manner, in real time, prompted us to realize we were going to be able to need data more quickly.
Using a big data program from privately held Explorys, Mercy's been reaching out to its high-risk patients.
I see that we are almost up to the 30-pound mark since November. Yes. That we've lost weight.
More actively working with them on preventive care.
Everyone thinks that they're doing a great job, but there is a great deal of variability when we look in the data.
That variability, by some estimates, costs the nation's health system hundreds of billions. Rachel is one of 9 million disabled and older Americans eligible for both Medicaid and Medicare. The sickest 20% of these patients account for 2/3 of health spending in those plans. Big data can help sort out unnecessary care, but it requires a big shift.
It's not just technology that's going to solve the problem, but it's going to be change management, meaning that who should we have involved? What kinds of care coordinators should we have involved?
A McKinsey study predicts the shift in reimbursement models and the push towards greater evidence-based medical care will drive strong demand for big data in healthcare over the next 5 years. The big challenge will be finding enough skilled workers to use it.
And to really make a difference.
My mom and my family's like, you're more like yourself now. You're back to our Rachel.
Bertha Coombs, Nightly Business Report.
Thank you. Thank you very much. No, we're short on time. I get started a little late. Okay?
Yeah. We have time. We have time for a few questions.
I wonder, it seems like that your company is in
You wait for the microphone.
Yeah. Seems like your seems like your company is really learning from the history of a number of other industries. and looking at the structure and anticipating how you expect the healthcare industry to move in a similar way. And I wondered if you could comment a little bit about if you think there's anything unusual about health care that might be an exception in any way in the regards that you're working, and then whether or not you think that how quickly you think this all will happen, or what some of the forces will be that will change the speed of the trajectory.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, it's a thesis, but we recognize that healthcare it's really far more complicated than those other industries. To be, totally frank with everybody, I think that some of the forces, I mean, even administration change, those kind of major factors, right? Rollback on certain ACA models and components have dramatic effects. So I think there's a lot of wild cards in there that could change. But I think in the end, the biggest macro one that really supports the fact that, and someone asked me what keeps me up at night, and I said it's not terrorism, it's not, it's the viability of our nation, and the health of our population breaking the back of our great nation. So at 18% of GDP, we got to do something. And so it's pretty clear that when we look ourselves at other nations, there's going to be transformation, and likely consolidation is a critical element to that. Speed, hard to tell. It's probably going to be shorter. You don't have the same free market per se that you saw in the other industries, so it's probably going to take a little more time. Thank you. Other questions? Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very much. I would just say, if I might, that I was recently in Washington and put the question in front of, I don't think I'm going to tell you who it was because he didn't really answer my question. That wouldn't really be fair. But, healthcare is a high-touch enterprise. And in spite of, all the fancy stories you hear, healthcare is largely local, if not regional, for most people. It just is. And so when health policy people in Washington are thinking about consolidation, which is kind of the sexy thing, and I get why, I'm always thinking about, I do telemedicine and have for 20 years, and I'm always thinking about the little towns where I go, over using the technology every week, and I'm thinking of those little towns, and I'm thinking of their providers. If they have a provider, it's a nurse practitioner, maybe one doctor, maybe in the region, but I'm just thinking about how all these, there's not really a strategy yet. Nobody's really thinking of a strategy for the more remote, rural, frontier, and underserved areas. And I think we need to start talking about, okay, might be the strategy for the biggest chunk of the population, but we also have to think of a strategy for, folks that aren't going to leave their community for their health care. We can take health care to them, but there's a part of it that's a pretty darn high-touch proposition. It's not just about sending, pharmaceuticals from a big retail pharmacy. This is more complex, just like you said.
No, I think it is. And we, even with consolidation, healthcare will always be delivered locally. It's what it is. It's a high touch, and it's just a matter of, aggregating enough to where we have continuity of care and we can see it and take responsibility for it. Whether it's in little rural areas or major metropolitan areas, I think you're absolutely right. Yep, totally agree.
All right.